The reading is from John chapter 20, beginning at verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned round and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Hello. I need a wee prayer, so will you join me? Dear Father, help us to hear your Spirit's voice, speaking in all of our hearts, for Jesus' sake. Amen. Well, good morning to you, and good morning to my granddaughter in Australia, and Chris, who's supposed to be watching. Can we give her a clap? All right. Next Easter, I want you here. Now, it's 63 years since I was ordained. And in all those years, as far as I can work out, I have never, ever preached on Mary Magdalene. So this is history. And I talk about her today because she was the first person to tell anybody else about the resurrection. But the problem with Mary Magdalene is everybody has all the most amazing notions about her. And I think we need to squelch some of those before we go any further. I mean, perhaps one of the biggest influences in understanding Mary Magdalene is the song from Jesus Christ Superstar, "I Don't Know How to Love Him." It's a lovely song. Totally misguided, but it's a lovely song. It sort of implies that she has a dark past, and that men have been very much in her life in all sorts of ways. There's no evidence of that whatsoever in the Bible. None at all. The only clue to what she was like is in Luke chapter 8. And that shows that she mixed, amongst others, with women of quite high social standing. And what she was doing in that passage in Luke chapter 8 is fascinating, because nobody else in the gospel seems to pick it up. That she and a group of other women were feeding the sandwiches, if you like, to keep Jesus and his team going on their travels. They were the support party. And the passage also tells us that she had obviously had some profound, what is described as 7 demons. That's the way they write it. Some profoundly oppressive condition that Jesus had completely liberated her from. And the result of that was that she was profoundly thankful, and that she dedicated her whole life to doing whatever helped Jesus and his cause. So you could say, thank you, you could say she did know how to love him. She loved him in those practical ways. And when things went terribly wrong for Jesus, and when all but one of his followers, his male followers, ran for cover, she didn't. And when he was nailed to the cross, Mary was there with the mother of Jesus, right to the end. And our story in John's Gospel, chapter 20, says, on the first possible occasion, when it was still dark, and for a single woman to go out even there was a bit frightening, she went to the tomb to be there. And when she got there, she found it was empty. And this leads me to the first of the 2 things I want you to hear Mary saying on the first Easter day. Because she ran to Peter, and it's interesting, Peter, you would have thought was in disgrace, but he was still there with all the rest of them. She ran to Peter and she said, they have taken the Lord, and we don't know where to put him. They've taken the Lord out of the tomb. And those words were said with total despair. You could hardly get them out. Not content with a rigged trial, not content with a brutal death, they'd even taken the body out of the tomb so that we had nowhere to remember him by at all. And Mary's life was totally shattered. Now, as I was scribbling out these words this week, my first thought was, of course, you and I have nothing in common with Mary at that moment. And my second thought was, yes, we have. Yes, we have. I wonder if you forgive me if I'm a bit personal for a moment. In 1943, I was still alive then. In 1943, as a boy of 9, I came down from my small Scottish town to South London. My father moved there for a job, and so I came down to the suburbs of South London in wartime, and we were homeless, several months homeless. And eventually, because it wasn't easy in those days, my father managed to find a maisonette that he could rent for the family. And the only interesting thing about the maisonette was I wish I was in it next week or whenever it is, because all the marathon people run right past the door. But that's the only good thing I think you can say about it, but that was what you could say. They didn't have the marathon in those days. But there was I, totally lost, with no friends. All my friends are back in Scotland. And logged in at a local school, which happened to be a church school. And somebody said yesterday I went to the Sunday school. I had nothing better to do. I had no friends any other way, so I went along there. And I met Jesus there. I met Jesus there. I met him in the smiles and the crowd, just like I've seen you today. tell you anything about today. I love to see them putting out chairs for people coming in the back. Nobody frankly sat in the front. Nothing changes, does it? Nothing changes. They said people couldn't get near Jesus with the press. Now we all sit at the back. But anyway, the thing about this Sunday school, there was about 70 or 80 of us, I think. It was led by a lovely grandfatherly man who I later learned was a chief industrialist. And he gave, after his wife had died, he gave his whole life, apart from running his company, to children and to telling Jesus, to people about Jesus, children about Jesus. And I just changed my life. It's been changed ever since. Amongst other things, I met Mary at the Sunday school, but we won't go into that. But today, with that past, that precious past, I feel I'm living in a society which is trying to take away my thought. I was just thinking the other day, never mind all the problems the Scottish National Party have with accountants at the moment. We're going to send Tom up to them and sort them out. They had this election for leaders. And shock horror, one of them was a Christian. So they chose a Muslim. They didn't want a Christian. They didn't want somebody who really believes in the Christianity stuff. That was very interesting. They're taking the Lord out of things. 25 years ago, when I wandered around, unlike Peter, with a purple shirt on all the time, I went on behalf of the Church of England to see the government minister in charge of the Millennium celebrations. So I went to see her, Miss Virginia Bottomley, if you remember that name, and she operated around this part of the world, I think she is. Anyway, and I said to her, and the Church of England said, so I had a bit of authority to speak to her. I said, how much have you and the Millennium Commission taken on board the fact that the Millennium is a Christian festival? It has no other rationale but that. To which she replied, I've never forgotten the words, what an interesting thought. What an interesting thought. She didn't stay there. She did move on from there. But she said, the trouble is, if we were to celebrate it as a Christian festival, that would upset all the other people of the other faiths. That's the big thing now. Yes. You cut Jesus out because it'll upset the other faiths. So I went back to Church House. I said, I want to talk to the leaders of the other faiths in this country. I want to talk to them soon, before the government gets any more head of steam. And so they set up this meeting. I remember we drank orange juice. It was the only thing we could all drink that we were allowed to drink. Quite nice orange juice, actually. And I said to them, we had Hindus there, we had Sikhs there, we had Jewish rabbi and Jewish council deputies they have, and a Muslim imam, 2 Muslims are there. And I just told them what the government had said to me, and how it might be a problem to the other faiths. And they laughed. They absolutely laughed. And one of the Jews said, we have our festivals, why can't you have yours? And the Sikh didn't say too much then, but he went back. He was a regular on thought for the day. And he turned 2 of his future thought for the days to talk about Jesus and the millennium. That's what he did. And the Imam said, we should not be fighting each other, the enemies of those who don't believe in God. And yet they still use this excuse that other faiths means you can't pretend you're Christian. You can't be open about it. They're taking away the Lord. Well, our story goes on from that point. Back to Mary. And there she is. And there is something more, because she went back to the tomb, and tears were streaming down her face, and she didn't change her mind. She was totally convinced that disaster had happened. And when someone nearby said why she was crying, she said, if you carried him away, if you're the gardener, whatever carried, let me know. And then came a voice that she'd not realized for a moment. It just said, Mary. That's all it was. Mary. I love what happens next, because when you read a commentary, they will tell you that when Jesus said, don't hold on to me, it's because he was going, well, he said it, I'm going to be with my Lord. What they don't point out is, she was holding on to him. That's why. She was giving her a great big hug. That's why. And why not? All her disaster suddenly changed in one moment. She suddenly saw that this was not a day of disaster. This was a day of triumph. And Jesus said, go and tell the others what you've seen. And she went back. And this comes the second word she said. She went back to Peter and the rest. She went back to the men who had deserted Jesus on the cross. And she said, I've seen the Lord. I have seen the Lord. There is so much more that could be said about Easter, and so much more that could be said with this passage and all that. But you know, in spite of those words that Mary said to the disciples, they still didn't believe her. Of course, they're all men, you know, thick. But they still didn't believe her. But that's good, actually, because it brings home the fact that they didn't fabricate Easter. They didn't make it up. They were as surprised as anybody. They were amazed. And we need to learn from this that they had to be persuaded that Easter had happened. And if it had not happened, then Jesus would have been no more than yet another dead hero. And the world's been full of them. If it had not happened, his cry on the cross, forgive them, was just some misguided wish. If it had not happened, the men who had arrested and lied at his trial and tried him and sent him to the cross would have been the victors. Yet again, evil would seem to conquer good. If it had not happened, there would be no clue as to whether there was any life after death. But they were persuaded rightly that it had happened. And I just want to share with you this thought today, that in a society that in one way or another, willfully or unwillfully, is somehow trying to take away Jesus, you and I have done the nearest thing to seeing that he's alive. And you and I are the key to changing any mindsets in anybody's hearts. Our prayers, the Holy Spirit, yes, but our words as well. We have to say in our own words, I've seen the Lord. Should we just pray? Yes, pray. I want in our prayers just for us to see ourselves outside that tomb, just ourselves, back in time, where Mary was. And just to sense, as she did, the loss of all our hopes, the finality of death. the end of all that was good. And then, as Mary did, to hear that person standing there who was no longer dead, calling not Mary, but your name. Calling your name. And by calling you specifically, calling you to realize the truth about him. And calling you to join him in the hope of a never-ending life and a joyous world that is evil-free. And in the meantime, to work to make the present world a bit nearer to the world God promises. And Mary said, my teacher. What do you and I say?